Now we're going to move on to the first panel discussion for the day, and our topic would be characteristics of leading smart cities. And your panelists here on stage, please welcome Mr. Hazim Galal, partner at PwC, Chairman and Director General of Ogero, Mr. Imad Kredi, Vice President, ICT Business Development, EITC, Mr. Jihad Tayara, Director, Head of Global Smart City Solutions from Nokia, Dr. Munir Zuhdi. Vice President, Digital Industries, Huawei Middle East, Mr. Safder Nazir. CEO of NXN, Mr. Ghazi Atala. And to moderate things up, please welcome Head of Smart City and Smart Government Practice and the UAE General Manager of NXN, Mr. Yusuf Khalili. And to formally open up our panel, please welcome Mr. Hazim Galal for a couple of words.
I would like to walk you during the next few minutes around some of the characteristics of leading smart cities. My name is Hazim Galal. I lead PwC's work with cities globally. I'm also part of the World Economic Forum's Future Council for Cities and Urbanization. And what I would like to do is share with you some of our thoughts about cities and what does it really mean to become a global smart city. The starting point is urbanization and what's happening around the world. Everybody knows the numbers. We're going from 7 to 9 billion in the planet, and a lot of these people are moving to cities. And if you think about the urbanization models that we've had in the past in the West, if India, which is below 50% urbanization today, were to urbanize the same way that the US and Europe have urbanized, there is nothing really that would allow us to support these type of demands in terms of emissions, in terms of some of the other issues that we're facing. And that's where technology becomes a very important enabler in allowing us to design and implement smart services in cities that we're able to face some of these accelerated urbanization challenges. The issue is we have to do this amongst other challenges with limited budgets, with fragmented, sometimes, authorities over cities between national, subnational, and city levels. And also there is a lot of issues in some of the cities, be it in India and some parts of the developing world, in terms of what does it really mean to have the sufficient resources to fund the infrastructure that we need to develop these smart services. However, on the positive side, if we think about what are some of the enablers besides technology, it is not only about technology, and we've been saying this for the past 10 years before smart cities became fashionable. Technology is just one of several enablers that you need to create a smart city. You need smart governance, you need leadership, you need smart ways of funding the infrastructure, you need stakeholder engagement and co-creation. Osman was talking about ecosystem. Oftentimes in cities, we find what I call ecosystems, where each department is working separately and we need to create a dynamic for collaboration. So what is it really that characterizes a smart city around the world? We did a survey with the World Economic Forum 2 years ago, where we asked 200 global leaders, city mayors, academics, architects, what is it that they think are the characteristics of a global smart city? And it's about sustainability, be it economic, environmental, or social. It is about being citizen-centric. At the heart of a smart city is a smart citizen that is getting all the services anytime, anywhere, any place. It is resilient. We've seen what happened with even some very well-known cities like New York when there is climatic changes and weather events that the city comes to its knees because the infrastructure was not resilient and there was no business continuity. It is also well-governed. It is innovative, economically vibrant. It is accessible not only for the handicapped, but for the elderly, for the children, so that everybody has access to services. And most importantly, it's well planned. And what this means is that we start seeing different experiences, whether it's smart tourism, if you're coming, for example, to Dubai, we go back and reflect about the customization, a segment of one. If I'm coming to Dubai or visiting other cities around the world, this customization happens with very targeted campaigns that know that, for example, Germans typically plan their visits or vacations 2 months ahead or even longer, and to understand really what are the purchasing patterns and what are the attributes that would customize this offering in a proactive way based on combining historical data with additional sources of data from travel, from spend, from credit cards, from telco operators, so that Dubai Tourism can proactively target this segment and this person with a targeted campaign. It is about driverless transport, be it public or private. It is about smart housing and managing utilities and the experience in a house in a way that is very customized and is very efficient. It is about open and adaptive learning, using new technology that would emphasize the future skills in terms of analytical thinking rather than memorization, and proactive healthcare. So it touches every aspect of our lives. We designed a scale to measure what does it really mean to be a true smart city. And you would notice that technology is only one component. So if you think about the different stages of urban development, at the very basic level, rudimentary, and then going to functional, integrated, and then fully scalable, and you look at all the different components, as a city, you really have to excel in each one of these dimensions to be called a truly smart city. And I would argue that very few cities around the world today are what we would call a truly smart city at the scalable part of this spectrum. And it's what I call sometimes the Maslow hierarchy of cities. It is very difficult for you to get to scalable if you haven't really addressed your basic needs. When we talk about smart cities in India, where we're working with about 27 of the 100 smart cities is about access to water sanitation, very basic services that we take for granted in other parts of the world. But when we talk about more advanced cities like Amsterdam, Dubai, and Singapore, and Hong Kong, it is about that full integrated experience on a day-to-day basis. And we need to be aware of these requirements and how they would change. Finally, we need to talk about what are the different economies that are being created because of smart cities. The sharing economy, everybody knows about ride sharing, but what does the sharing economy look like for real estate? You know, one of the most underutilized assets, for example, is office space. What does the sharing economy look like to use some of these buildings in CBDs and cities so that we're able to maximize their use 24/7 and be able to get better returns on the infrastructure investment? Sometimes it's not about creating new infrastructure. It is about optimizing and maximizing the use of your infrastructure. And of course, the digital economy, be it open data, private sector data, just some numbers here, you know, in terms of the potential. In Dubai, we expect here 3 billion a year to be added between now and 2021 by combining smart data from public and private sector and developing the use cases. We also asked, what are the top technologies that are driving this urban transformation? You would notice these 10 technologies. At the top of them is IoT. No surprises here, but what is really important is what you see on the right-hand side is the emergence of these new business models around some of these technologies. So cities are becoming, providers of advisory services to other cities. We are seeing the sharing and the circular economy. We are seeing integrated city operations. Some cities are even thinking about starting to offer a city urban services basically remotely. How can you do that in a way that actually is more cost effective? And think about this from the telecommunications industry. What does that mean to you if this is the change in the mindset of the urban services? 5G, we've spoken about it a lot yesterday, but at the heart of a lot of these 10 technologies that I mentioned, especially IoT, 5G is going to play a major role in terms of some of these trends like digital twins. I wish sometimes I had a digital twin to go to some of the boring meetings. However, it's about connecting people to things. All of these, at the heart of all of these things is 5G. And unless the industry is ready to start thinking about the business cases and the new operating models in all of these vertical industries and connections between them, we don't talk about value chains anymore. We talk about network chains between different sectors that would need to interact. Some of the uses of the digital twins, and an example here from the power industry and electricity, unless you're able to start thinking as an industry, what are the value drivers, for example, for digital twins in terms of cost reduction, in terms of lifetime extension of aging assets, and you start to have these conversations with the buyers who are city mayors, governors, government, the World Bank, unless you start thinking about your services and products in these languages to show the benefits. And we may agree or disagree about some of these assumptions in the business cases, but this is, I think, where the industry has not really done its homework to create these kind of conversations at that level of the return on investment. I'm going to start wrapping up. This is a survey that we've done in the US amongst 1,000 internet users in terms of what would be their perception and reaction to 5G. And you would notice here some very interesting things with respect to the average is 62% in terms of the appeal, but you see some interesting patterns age-wise, basically, between the internet natives and some of the internet migrants. You also see quite an interesting trend between urban versus rural, with urban being at 67% and 57%. Finally, to wrap up, the digital transformation journey for any city is very contextual. The starting point is what is the DNA, what is the context of that city, and what makes it unique. And then you start identifying the challenges, developing the shared vision, all the way through actually creating very pragmatic, implementable programs that would help you undergo that transformation. So my challenge to you as an industry is how are you going to take part in that digital transformation? Thank you very much.
Can you hear me? Hello? Hello. Thank you, Hazem. Wonderful insights. Actually, it sets the stage very well to discuss in a very interactive way the characteristics that Hazem mentioned of what could be differentiating smart cities, and multiple dimensions: sustainability, customercentricity, resilience, governance, innovation, well-planning. I'd like actually to use that as an opportunity to get some of your insights on how you see the characteristics of differentiated smart cities. And I'll start, and then I'll go into digging deeper into some of those topics. So I'll start with you, Dr. Munir. 2 minutes on how you see it from a vendor perspective.
Okay, so basically, there are so many ways you can define a smart city, right? The most common definition is to utilize the latest innovations in ICT technology to increase the competitiveness of the city, the sustainability of the city, and the quality of the services that you deliver to the citizens and the tourists. So there are so many possibilities for different use cases and applications where you can apply technology to enhance the services. But in general, it falls into 3 different categories. It can be smart, safe, or sustainable. So basically, a smart city is the one that is able to make all the applications and the services that are delivered smart, to improve the environmental, the business, sustainability of the city, and also the safety of the people. When you look at some of the examples globally for the different smart cities, you find that it's very hard to compare any 2 cities. Every city is unique. Every city has a unique DNA. So a smart city is the one that is able to solve all the challenges that are faced by the people who live in the city and add value to them.
Thank you. And maybe I'll go to the next vendor and I'll come back from a vendor perspective as Huawei. How do you see differentiated smart cities sub there?
Well, firstly, I wouldn't segment that way in terms of vendors and non, because actually when we talk about smart cities, it should all be fairly similar. But if we look at the progress of cities, you can probably classify them into 3 different domains, which is first, let's say, Smart City 1.0 was about connectivity and putting things together. And 2.0, maybe you can see cities that we're looking at being more responsive. So we can understand what's happening in the city now that it's connected, and we can do something about it. And I think probably the City 3.0, empowered by the likes of 5G and so on, will allow for more immersive emotional experiences. And that kind of touches on what Mr. Osman was talking about in terms of from human to human. Because once we get to that next level of immersive emotional experiences, it's coming back to being a human again. So when I interact with the city, I feel like I'm just interacting with a human. And I can do it in a more human way than being forced into some technology angle of how to engage with and address the city. So I think that another important point that Hazim raised was, and I've spoken about this before, is that no 2 cities have to be the same. What one city might consider as smart, so if you go to a place that doesn't have sanitary, water and electricity and you provide them that, that's probably their first stage of being smart, right? And their journey. So long as a city has a program of improvement, I would consider it to be on a smart city journey. And what it needs to do is relative to where it is right now.
Thank you. Mr. Ahmad, tell us from a telco operator, from a provider of infrastructure, what's your view? How do you look at the evolution of smart cities from your perspective?
Yes. Basically, 50% of the population are coming from cities. 70% of the GDP is produced by cities. And those cities are mainly why we're thinking about implementing a smart city. There is a very crucial reason behind it. It's because the number of challenges that cities are facing, and I will be talking specifically about Lebanese cities like Beirut, whereby we have a problem in environment, we have a problem in imbalances of resources, we have a problem of infrastructure, and smart cities will fall in place in order to deal with those challenges. So it's not a gimmick, it's becoming, and as time will pass by, smart city concept will become a necessity in order to manage all those challenges and resources. What we have started to do from a telco perspective, as an operator perspective, is Beirut and Lebanese cities needed a infrastructure in order to, as a starting stone for the smart city. So deploying fiber all the way in order to provide the connectivity and enable different platforms that will move the Lebanese cities into the smart.
Great. And Jihad, your perspective?
Good morning, everyone. Yes, it's a very interesting question, and
It's better be aligned with Osman.
Definitely aligned. We did the homework yesterday evening, and it's all aligned. It's all aligned. Sorry, yeah. There is not a single definition of smart city that you can have a full panel agree on, or even audience. Or it's very difficult to align on single smart city. I've visited many smart cities. I've been to Tokyo. I've been to Amsterdam, and they all have a different flavor to smart city. So in Tokyo, it's more about disaster recovery. What do they do when there's an earthquake? How do they maintain energy production and generation and electricity to the homes? In Amsterdam, it's more about transportation. In Dubai, we're lucky. It's more, as you mentioned, it's all the dimension that we're looking at. And the most important thing in every city is to address the problem or the value proposition that the city is offering. So in Dubai, it's all about happiness. Okay? It's very important to understand what it means and how we are utilizing technology as a means to an end rather than as the showcase of technology to claim that this is a smart city. So to align with what Osman was saying, we're definitely moving. So Dubai has always been smart in this aspect. So we always had all the departments that were very smart, that had all the apps, all the services that are smart. But now we're moving from those vertical services to a horizontal layer, which is the horizontal platform that aggregates all those services together, integrate them. And we mainly, to do this, utilizing the IoT technologies, utilizing data as a source of decision making. So we're putting all the technology, be it blockchain as well and AI, as Osman was saying, in terms of transformation from a human to intelligent robot to human again, to make the people and the resident life much easier and more pleasant. So that's nutshell.
Thank you. Ghazi's view, disclaimer, Ghazi is my boss, so I'll give him the easiest questions.
You left me till the end, though.
Yes, to wrap it up in a nice view. Please.
Oh, sorry. I think in plain English, when we talk to cities and look at what characterizes a smart city or not, I think the most important elements for us is, first, do they know where they're going? Do they have a clear vision? It's very important for cities to be clear on where they want to go. Second, do they know how to get there? Do they have a good plan of going from point A to point B? Sounds simple, but not many cities have it. And most importantly, where cities fail, and they fail big time across the region, across the world, is collaboration. We see this day in, day out. For cities to affect the city experience, to affect people's lives, to affect business, to affect efficiency and so on, they must create an environment of collaboration. They must be able to collaborate across city departments to start with, and then between public sector and private sector and so on. So what we see across many of the cities in the region and across and the world is that they did not put in place the policies, they did not put in place the technology, they did not address the data problem. So you see things like smart parking, which is very nice. You see things like siloed smart city initiatives. But it's heavy lifting for cities to create a collaborative city experience across the board, not just smart parking or smart lighting or smart traffic or what have you. It's, did they address my issues as a city dweller, as a person who lives in the city, in terms of creating that holistic collaborative experience across the city? And this is heavy lifting. This is actually bringing people together, putting the right policies in place, putting the right technology in place and so on, and that's usually left and not really addressed. And we believe this is the biggest problem that cities have, and this is where they spend most of their time if they want to create really that characteristic of a smart city and create that leap forward.
So this collaborative model and change management is the secret sauce. So I'll go back to connectivity. I'd like us to now dig deeper into these. So if we think of an architecture of a smart city from a technology blueprint, we look at the connectivity and then the data and then the connectivities and connectors and then the applications. And I'd like to talk more about the connectivity and the actual infrastructure, because as you said, Safdar, this is where it all starts. And I'll actually start from the work that's been done in the city of Beirut, for instance. And I'd like to know more, how do you see this actually changing things in Beirut or in Lebanon at large? And
actually, the plan is to fiberize the whole country. And it is a stepping stone, as I said earlier. It starts with a state-of-the-art infrastructure based on fiber, be it to the home or to the curb, in order and to provide the needed connectivity, either with our partners for in the wireless segment, to provide this connectivity capabilities for all, the platforms or applications to be used as for the smart city business. So we launched a major program that is a national program. Around 17,000 kilometers of fiber will be laid down, and 1.2 million households will be connected through fiber. All of this is being done in order to upgrade this infrastructure and to enable the operators and the developer to start working on transforming the cities and the business.
And wireless? Any work on the wireless?
Wireless, we're working with Alpha and Touch in order to backhaul their sites in order for them to start developing the 5G rollout in Lebanon. So we will have the wireline as well as the wireless equipped for future moves.
Thank you. Jihad, is there an ROI model for this? I mean, operators can go and build this state-of-the-art infrastructure, but without actual sponsorship from the government and the fact that this can harvest and yield economical benefits because you're for
That's a
profit.
very good
how
question.
does that work for you guys?
It's a good question, and it's always debated now. I mean, we've seen this in 4G, 3G, and then 4G, and then 5G. It's always what's the ROI, what's the use case, how are you going to deploy it, how are you going to monetize it. I'd shift a little bit the discussion towards the technologies that we're currently utilizing towards. So I don't want to touch on 5G yet, okay? I want to touch more on the LoRa's of this world, the NB-IoT, all those networks that we are creating. So we've launched the first LoRa network in the Middle East 2 years ago. Okay, we showcased this and we demonstrated the capability. Our strategy now is to focus, and this is obviously less expensive, so it has more the ROI than deploying a full 5G network across the country. So we opted for a LoRa sporadic deployment. So in specific areas where we're developing smart districts, if I may say so. You go from smart city to smart district. We deploy that. And currently, we're evolving into a nationwide, or citywide, and then nationwide NB-IoT network. So we're utilizing NB-IoT to deploy those services on top. So like Ghazi mentioned, from smart parking to smart metering to all the wireless sensing network. In terms of ROI as well, we went into a public-private partnership with the government of Dubai. So we have a PPP contract with the Smart Dubai office where we're building the Smart Dubai platform. It's called Dubai Pulse. It's currently live and operational. And this is, I call it the digital heartbeat of the city. So it's a repository of all government data on that platform. It hosts more than 23 government entities, more than 350 data sets on that platform. And this is where we start seeing collaboration. So by nature, you cannot force entities to collaborate if you don't provide that ecosystem. So it's regulation, yes, but also you need to provide the infrastructure and the capabilities and the platform for those entities to collaborate. We've always heard about data being the new oil. But guess what? The oil has always been in the ground. Now we're trying to explore that, get it out of the ground. Because we have the data. It's the holy grail of data where you can mix telco data together with RTA, road and transport data, together with Dubai economy data. All that data together will make much more sense to the end user.
So I'm going to come back to the value of the data. And Safdar, from a technology point of view, from a connectivity technology point of view, what do you see in the next 3 to 5 years, and how are you guys, are you investing? Are you working on any collaborative models with governments? How do you, I'm going to focus on the ROI bit.
Sure. So if we think about it from a greenfield city perspective, what would you want? So you'd probably, if I was planning a new city, I'd probably say I want connectivity wherever or everywhere within the city, wherever I want it. And I'll touch on that a little bit because I do believe we need to plan for connectivity-free zones. That doesn't mean where connectivity is free, but where there is no connectivity. This is a trend that people are, if we don't address things before they happen, then we find that we've already hit the wall and then we've got a problem. So there's probably a growing movement where people want to be disconnected. So I'd plan for that in the city as well. And then also plan for infinite connectivity. Right? I shouldn't be, infinite bandwidth, sorry. I shouldn't be restricted by bandwidth. That's what I would want when I'm looking at a city. But then we come to how do we provide it? How do you plan for that? So of course there's some other technology which we maybe want to talk about in terms of future-looking 5G and low-power wide area type networks. In terms of how do we cover the city? This is why it's very important that we don't get stuck in between what does the city want to achieve, which in my view should be a city leaders sponsored program, a vision for the city. If we looked at everything from a pure ROI basis, we probably wouldn't do a lot of things because we'd only look at what makes money. So that's why it needs to be addressed from a city perspective, and actually is a piece of work that we're looking to do right now, which is taking a particular city and looking at the complete ROI business case of doing a smart city program, which would include things like impact on GDP, impact on tourism, if that's what you want to do. So why did the city choose to do this rather than how much ARPU do I make from a particular user in that city and should I roll out the network? So when we look at it at a bigger picture perspective, then we might say, well, actually, the city needs to absorb some of those costs, right, as a part of why the city wants to do the program. And it doesn't make sense, and it's one of the the reason I believe a number of cities have not achieved their original expectations, because a lot of the models, the economic models, the ROI models, falsely or incorrectly burden the model with what I would call sunk costs for the city, like fiber deployment, for example, right, or building towers. This should be maybe city infrastructure, right? So when we, when we're laying electricity cables and pipes for water in the city, so we should also address some of the telecom needs. So if we thought about it clearly up front, what we're trying to achieve, then we can address some of these issues down the way.
And Dr. Munir, how does Nokia look at connectivity, and what's new down your sleeves?
What's extremely important whenever it comes to smart city is to build the infrastructure right first time. Because once you have the infrastructure in place, it's very hard for you to go and make changes. It can be very disruptive to the services that you deliver to the customers. But at the same time, for the infrastructure, it has to be scalable, because the number of services is going to grow, the number of connected devices is going to grow. It has to be able to cater to the diverse requirements for all the different applications and use cases and all that. And you need to make sure that you ensure the safety and the security of the data that goes through the infrastructure. And going back to earlier comments that it has to be horizontal, because you want to have shared infrastructure. You don't want to have any duplication in the investment. And that helps you in improving the ROI. So when you look into the diverse infrastructure, you find that there are some requirements for maybe massive machine type communication, extreme broadband connectivity, ultra reliability, low latency requirements. And this is where the opportunity for 5G comes for deployment in smart city services, where you can have one network that can really cater to all these different requirements. And especially now with the network slicing, which many now label as the game changer really in the deployment, because now you can optimize the delivery of services. True. So all this can really help you with ROI. At the same time, if you just look at one service, you might find that the business case might not be as attractive, right? But it's very important for us not to get lost in the number of the business cases, because there's a lot of assumptions in there, right? There are some strategic aspects in it. One example I can give you, for example, smart lighting is very, very popular, right? Because you save energy, you can control and all that. So you can say that, okay, this is how much money I'm saving. But one interesting discussion I had with the mayor of Chicago, they said that actually they found a direct correlation between the lighting in an area and the crime rate. And now Chicago is really suffering from that. So how do you factor that into a business case, right? So there's a lot of things that are intangible that are hard to do that. Another example, there was a town in China, and they said that most of the couples, whenever they finish school, they go to big towns. They go to Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and all that. So for them, they want to attract talents. They want to attract businesses. So some of those things also are hard to incorporate into business cases. So there's a lot of intangibles that you might not be able to reflect them in the business.
Thank you, Doctor. Ghazi, we heard Hazem talk about well-planned cities, and this whole notion of being able to actually master plan a full city, and what you mentioned around collaboration models between the government themselves and between government and the private sector. Is this an art or a science or a mix? How do you look at that? Did anybody crack it?
Wow. You're making things difficult, you said. It's an art, it's a science, it's...
that was an easy one.
No, okay. It's an art, it's a science, it's everything. I think, we tend to complicate things. We'd love to simplify things as industry professionals. And the idea of master planning is being clear on where you want to go and being clear on what are the steps in between to get there. And in cities, we talk about the infrastructure very clearly. Make sure that you have a clear plan in terms of infrastructure. We talk about the brain of the city, the platform. Have we done the right thing to make sure that we have that brain? Have we addressed the data issue and being able to bring all that data and all that knowledge into a place where you can leverage as a start? And all of these are very important. Have we set the right metrics? Have we said, in year one, this is where we want to get to. In year two, this is where we want to get to. Have we set the right KPIs and metrics for master planning the city? So making sure we understand where we're going, and then making sure we also understand, did we get to point A, did we get to point B, and did we get to point C? And also, last but not least, is in places like Dubai, which is probably one of the most advanced, and we work with the government of Dubai for a long time. And when we set out to say we want to create a mega initiative, called paperless city or paperless Dubai, when we talked about this with the government many years ago, we looked at this type of initiative and said, wow, this is going to take us at least 3 years to get there. Why? Because this is the heavy lifting. We set out initiatives that were individual. So RTA, Road and Transport Authority, specific set of initiatives, the Department of Economic Development, specific set of initiatives, and so on. But the paperless city actually cuts across all of them. And the plan is to do this over 3 years, because it's going to have to look at stakeholders, it's going to have to look at interaction between stakeholders, it's going to have to look at various policies, changes, and so on. So this is the top level of master planning, is looking at what would it take to actually change the game across the city and impact that city experience.
And how do cities race? What's this reference model or this maturity model? Is there today a maturity model that exists? I mean, Hazem, you mentioned some of those characteristics, and let's assume all cities became smart today. How do they compete? I mean, if they all became smart, they will all attract talent, they will all achieve the same things. They must differentiate. I'd like to hear more about the concept of differentiation and measuring how they race within this whole domain, and maybe Jihad, you can give us some insights. What do you think?
I think there is no point measuring the process itself. It's not about the process. You internally measure your process. So like Ghazi was saying, how do you go from point A to point B? This is your journey towards transforming the city. But what you want to measure is your target, is the end result. So are you really reaching the happiest city in the world? This is the target. Is this what you want? So a target like blockchain, this is not the real target. The real target is to reach a paperless city. Okay, you can deploy technology. This is not an issue. You mentioned vendors. We call them partners, but all the partners are there. We can work together on deploying technology. The technology is becoming now much cheaper, much affordable. It's way developed. Blockchain was there for ages, but the technology now is feasible and doable. So by utilizing this technology, you can transform this city. But what you want to measure is, are you really reaching a paperless society by the target you want? Are you really competitive enough that you have happy citizens in the city? And what you want to measure as well is again, we've always been in the journey of delivering from point A to point B, measuring how much data sets we have on the platform. I think now we need to start moving from a Dubai perspective, I'm talking from the platform perspective, to start talking about how many decisions are being taken through that data.
Based on this data.
Exactly. And this is what we're showcasing outside here, a tool called the crowd management tool. So you want to move this data into a decision-making tool, and we're showing this. We're aggregating the telco data with some other city data, where we're doing a historic 6 months heuristic analysis of the data, and we're showing a predictive model where we're showing you where would the traffic be across the city. So this is a tool that you can utilize. And this is what I call a decision based on data, rather than only saying I'm collecting data and I'm aggregating and using the data.
If every city had its own reasons to transform, does it actually matter at all for them to race towards becoming the smartest city in the world? And because they today race, they like to become the smartest.
I mean, it's a race.
So there must be some unified...
I'll give you a nice twist about this race. Denver mayor said the 19th century was the century of empires, the 20th century was the century of nations, the 21st century is the century of cities. So cities are now racing and competing against each other, which is a very interesting perspective to realize.
Ghazi?
Yeah, cities are now competing for what? They're competing for business, for economy. So as being smart addresses that objective, if cities are competing against each other for people or companies, or this is what they're doing. Dubai is trying to attract as many companies, as many people to live in Dubai as possible. Same thing for, well, maybe not the exact same thing, but slightly different for cities across the region. But there's a competition between cities for a specific target, which is economic prosperity at the end. And how they get there, or is it large businesses, is it petrochemical, is it tourism, is it whatever it is, and what do they need to do to actually attract those? This is the real competition, and this is the real competition between cities across the region, and saying, come and live in my city because my city is better than the other city, and this is where economic prosperity will happen. And I think as smart and as technology would address and affect that, then it accomplishes the city's goals.
So being customer-centric, we've heard this as one of the characteristics, and being delivering personalized experiences based on the data and based on the insights. A question that always comes to the mind, Jihad, you spoke about technology is not the objective, but it's the means. And then the question is, does it really matter what technologies are used versus what customers want? Do cities study well what their stakeholders want, whether it's the city managers, whether it's the people who live in the city? I'd like to have some examples from for instance, Lebanon. Do you think this kind of work has been done in terms of understanding how the impact is for delivering wonderful technologies and infrastructure?
Basically, comparing the Lebanese cities to what is happening in the region is a little bit an offshoot because yet the infrastructure is not there to support the smart city yet concept. But obviously, I would like to go back a little bit to what Jihad was saying about, having a smart city is not, the technology is there, but what matters is the end result.
Yep.
The end result is the well-being of the people. We are mobilizing those resources in order for the cities to meet their challenges and to transform the living of the people living in the cities. So basically, what needs to be done in the first place is defining the objective. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity now for cities. Before reaching the states of happiness for the people is how to deal with the challenges that the people are facing. Beirut, for instance, is facing a problem with traffic, with environment, with a very serious problem of power management. So if smart cities are to be implemented in Beirut, for instance, we need first to tackle those challenges that are making the life of people miserable.
Correct. And Dr. Munir, you mentioned safety as one of the aspects. And we're blessed to be living in a wonderful city that's probably the safest in the world. But tell us how that parameter is being looked at to differentiate cities and make them become a better destination.
Okay. Well, I mean, first, when it comes to smart city, you're talking about vital elements of the economy, right? The utilities, the power grid, the homes, the cars. It's extremely important not to take any shortcuts when it comes to safety and security. So here, even though we might be blessed with safety, but that's only physically. But when you go into the cyber world, it's a completely different animal, right? Because then you are not protected by your geographical locations or anything like that. And we've seen in the last 2 years how all the social issues related to data privacy, security, and all that kind of surface into the public domain, whether it's in the EU or the US and all that. So it's very important when it comes to security to take a holistic view, to not to take any shortcuts, to never look at the solution as an aggregated silos. You have to look at the end-to-end security for any new solution that you are introducing to the citizens or the residents that you have. And if you don't have a safe solution, a secure solution, then you don't have a solution. Doesn't matter how cheap it is, doesn't matter how innovative it is. So very important to keep that in mind. The other thing is that whenever you make something smart, you make it connected, you make it programmable, basically you're putting a computer in it. So you're putting also all the inherent issues of computers, right? So even it might be safe from day one, but if the sensors are going to be in the field for 20 years, all kind of things might happen over that time, right? Because it's a cat and mouse thing. So it's very important to make sure that you have all the software up to date, to be able to do over-the-air upgrades for all the software, to make sure that you're always ahead of the curve. Yesterday, there were a lot of examples about Tesla. Tesla, within 32 months, they had 29 software upgrades to make sure that they're always ahead of the curve. So very important for you to look at it like that, to make sure that the softwares are always up to date, to look at end-to-end security, to make sure that only authenticated devices are connected to the network, to make sure that there's always a monitoring for the traffic, there's no introduction for any malware, no intrusions there, to detect early DDoS attacks, to check the versions for the firmwares that you have and all that. So end-to-end view for the security.
Thank you. And this leads to a resilient city as much as possible, as mentioned by Hazem. So you've got a focus on that area. How the concept of city resiliency, is that something?
So how is the concept of?
City resiliency based on safety.
So one of the things that we'd talk about is a safe city before smart city. Now, well, you say, well, it's safe, not smart. So actually,
Audience?
It's quite factual that without feeling safe or being in a safe city, people perhaps don't want to worry about some of the other things. So in terms of a foundation for building a city, of course, it must be a safe place, otherwise people wouldn't want to move there. Just picking up on what Jihad said about the 21st century being the century of cities. Actually, that's like going back historically, because historically people moved to cities, right? And there were citadels or walled cities that people moved to, and they moved there for security, number one, for prosperity, and for social interaction. And it's not too different today, right? So the age of going back to cities competing with each other is a return back to history. So we have a lot of returns from human to human, from city to city. So a lot of things kind of repeat themselves over time. On the relation of security to safety, safety to smart, yes, of course, without getting things safe, then maybe we wouldn't think about some of the other nicer things to do. Of course, cities do compete and will always compete, but what we consider as smart is a relative term. What you consider smart today, you will not consider smart tomorrow or in a year's time. So it's always a moving thing. That's why I would prefer to talk about smart city programs rather than smart city as a thing. Now I've become smart and then I don't need to do anything else. It's a journey of continuous improvement.
It's a living organism.
Yeah,
correct. I'd like to use the next 5 minutes, 6 minutes to open questions to the audience. Oh, we have already somebody. If you could please just introduce yourself.
My name is Wafiq Ajour, Executive ICT Advisor for the Government of Bahrain. A key component in the city digital transformation journey is people. There is an immense need to build the next digital graduates. My question to the panel, the whole panel, what is your company engagement program with university in the region to develop digital graduates that not only drive the smart city initiative, but sustain it, but also sustain it?
Students, the graduates.
Yes, sir. These are the next generation who are going to sustain what we talk about. Thank you.
Sure. Anyone?
I can comment briefly on this. So we have an initiative with Nokia where we're, if you want, Munir, you can elaborate on this. We're taking students and educating them about new technologies and what's happening. And we have different initiatives, something called like 5 Gig Lab. So we create an environment where we invite companies and students as well to test the technology, to play around with the technology, to see what they can do and how they can, once they reach the professional life, how can they apply that knowledge into real life problems. So I mean, we're working with universities and education system to tackle that problem.
It's an important element, the human element and the people, and how we prepare local talent versus.
And sorry, one final comment. And having said this, we still, as an industry, have a lot to do to develop the talents.
Yeah.
So we always hear this problem. So the ideal data scientist does not exist. A guy that understands data, that is a business leader, that understands how to manipulate this data and the data science and all the, it's a very rare commodity. So we still, as an industry, have a lot to do. And again, it's a journey. We will never reach the finish line, as the scientist Sheikh Muhammad says. It's always evolving. It's always changing. So new technologies is coming. So
thank you, John.
I can add maybe a few words. So this is something actually, it's a challenge that is faced in every country, every city, right? It's a global. So with Nokia, obviously, we partner with a lot of our customers to go with universities, to do programs, guest lectures, trying to give them up-to-date information about the latest of technology. technologies, at the same time working with them on hackathons, on the graduation projects for the students, because what you're finding is that most of the curriculums in universities are kind of 20th century curriculum. A lot of times, by the time you finish a textbook, it's already obsolete because there are so many changes that are happening. Even myself, I do some teaching part-time. I don't rely on any textbooks. You always have to give information that are up to date with what's happening, with the technology.
But I have to say that a lot of universities, at least I've seen here and in Saudi, are introducing the topics around data science, around IoT, around smart cities, digitization. I've seen even programs, master programs, being offered by universities that are now focusing on this, with sponsorship, by the way, from the government. So I'm not sure about Bahrain, excuse me, but at least in this city, there is a lot of focus on that, but it's very important. Any other questions? Ladies, gentlemen, yes, please. The gentleman here. Here in the front.
Monique.
Monique, in the back.
He has
the
the
mic.
microphone.
I'm coming back. Oh, you have the mic? I'm sorry. I'll come back to you, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the
If
talks.
you can speak up, we can't hear you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the talks. I have a question. A lot of cities that already adopted smart implementations, such as San Francisco, Amsterdam, Oslo, they also took a parallel decision to make all of the data that is gathered from these sensors, from these facilities, from this management style, to make this data completely open for researchers, for academia, etc., in order to try to push forward our understanding of these cities. I don't see much of these initiatives going on in the Middle East. Maybe the panelists can give us some insight on this.
So data being open for research purposes?
Yes.
Ghazi?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, so
Jihad, you consumed all
we're
your
definitely
credits.
lagging behind. So we're definitely lagging behind some of the European Union cities and so on. Here in the city of Dubai, we created a data law and a data policy around openness. So I think just being able to organize data and classify data that exists within the city, taking care of privacy issues and other types of issues. But eventually, most of this data can be classified as open and then publicly released to many of the researchers in the private sector and so on to be able to utilize. That's happening here in Dubai, clearly. The law is there, and even the policies of publishing data is now in full force, and I'm sure Jihad will speak about this. We also are seeing this across the region now at the federal level in the UAE, where we are defining the standards of data and the data around what's classified as private and what's classified as open. So you can see initiatives happening, not to the same extent as the EU or North America and other cities across the world, but it's definitely picking up momentum right now.
Okay. Just to add on what Ghazi was saying, so there in Dubai, there is a data law that was issued, and there's a classification process that's happening. But if you can go now live on dubaipulse.gov.ae, it's a platform, this is the Smart Dubai platform that we mentioned, and you'll find some open data there. So there is data already that is available to the public. Now the classification process takes this from, there's public data, the open data, public data, and there's private and shared data, which is not to be open to the public. So to start with, there is something, there is data that's there, and you can utilize it, and we're planning kind of hackathons early next year to encourage the startups and the youth and those organizations to play around with this data and see what we can develop out of it and what we can take out of it.
Jihad.
We're not, as you mentioned, as advanced as some of the European cities, but we have data that's available.
Thank you, Jihad. One last question from the gentleman here, and we'll conclude.
Good morning. Fadi Sidani from Governance Dynamics. Thank you. Very, very exciting discussion about smart cities. I was wondering whether there is a common maturity definition of what constitutes to be a smart city. There seems to be variations between the various players at what they determine to be a smart city. Is there something that is common that is defined by the industry at large, or each company and partner define it their own way?
I know of some work that's being done, so I'll leave the mic to Ghazi in a second, but Hazem, maybe you wanted to also say something? No, they can't hear you. Let's give you the mic.
There was a process that started about 6 years ago to create an ISO standard 37120. The initial part which I was involved in was about reaching a standard for smart infrastructure. And rather than coming up with a standard, we came out with a process. Then there was another part about coming up with indicators that would measure basically how smart is a city. And this is ongoing work. It's spearheaded by the World City Council for Data out of Toronto. So there is an ongoing process with the ISO community to do that.
Razi?
Yeah, so as mentioned, actually a very well-defined maturity model by the International Standards Organization is coming up very soon. This model allows for cities to be compared against each other. My team was part of the working group that was defining this maturity model, and it will allow us to compare cities. We've actually started comparing Dubai, London, Singapore, and Moscow as the first 4 cities that we are using this maturity model to compare cities against on behalf of the International Standards Organization, ISO. This will then be published as not only the maturity model, but the results, and then that will be used actually to compare other cities against this model. So yes, work is being done. It's actually pretty mature now.
Great. So we're up with our time. Thank you so much, Ghazi, Safdar, Jihad, Imad, and Dr. Munir, and Hazem for the great insights. I hope this was a good worth of your time, and we look forward to continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.